Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars! Fuck you!
The movies, the internet stuff is so violent. It's so incredible.
I see worried about it just because the consumption of these violent video games has been going up continuously since the early 90s, and yet youth violence has been
If
going
you
down.
look at juvenile crime statistics, which have gone down dramatically over the past 15 years, it really doesn't seem to bear what the American pediatrics.
You can pick up guns, knives. You can now choose to punch, kick, headbutt people, stab them.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Restream.io. Looking to build an audience on several platforms and get your content out to different sources? Restream can help you broadcast to multiple platforms at once. Sign up for free today to get your account started. Then link your platforms to your Restream account, copy the stream key into your streaming software, and then go live. Easy as that. Restream, networking for streamers. Also, be sure to follow and like us on Facebook.com/ArrowEncoded and on Twitter at ArrowWAN2020. If you are watching us on Twitch.tv/Arrow with a name, hit that follow. Also on YouTube for Arrow Entertainment, hit that subscribe button. Now, on with the show. Hello everyone. How y'all doing this Sunday evening? Welcome back to Tune In Live. We are doing our history look on the franchise, which is known as Resident Evil, as you can tell by the music in the background. Before we get started, our Discord lines are open. If you want to hop in as a guest, or any co-host want to hop in, and we could talk about the classic 1996 game known as Resident Evil that kickstarted an amazing franchise for everybody. Discord lines are open, so if you want a link to our Discord, just DM me on Twitter at ArrowWAN2020, ArrowWAN2020, or hit me up on Facebook. So, today, taking a look at the classic, once again, the classic Resident Evil, which released at least 2 or 3 different variants within a 2 to 3 year period. You had the original, which actually started out as a big box version of the game, because back then, games like that for PlayStation originally started out as big box titles. And I guess it followed suit with, what was it at the time? Sega Saturn. They had those big jewel case boxes. I guess that was the thing with CD-based games for consoles. I mean, hell, PC had big box games, but they were all cardboard, but Sega Saturn had it. And I think Sega CD also had it too. Actually, Resident Evil didn't even really start on PlayStation. Well, that wasn't the only platform that it started out on. It was also available on Sega Saturn, which was very big over in Japan. It also came out here in the States, but Sega Saturn didn't really last that long anyway. It was only out for maybe, I want to say 2 or 3 years before it bit the dust, because Sony was in the market, and of course Nintendo was working on their new console, and then PC gaming was also big at the time too. So if you look at Resident Evil from 1996, this was a game that was created by Shinji Mikami and Takuro Fujiwara. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those names right. And owned by the video game company Capcom. If you're not familiar with Capcom, they released a lot of big hits in the 90s. I think it started out in the late 80s, going into the 90s. Games like Mega Man, Street Fighter, very big for those. I think they even had some RPGs. I can't remember if they were an RPG game or what, had any RPG games or whatever. But anyway, Resident Evil. It was a franchise that focused on a series of survival horror games, includes live-action films, anime films, comic books, novels, audio dramas, and merchandise. The story follows outbreaks of zombies and other monsters created mainly by the corporation Umbrella, which is a fictional corporation well known within the lore of Resident Evil. So the first game was released in 1996, and each episode that I do here is going to focus on an entry in the franchise. So I'm not going to be all over the place talking about Resident Evil 2 today or 3 today. I'm only going to focus on the first. So I'm going to give you a little background with the franchise. So the first game came out in 96. The franchise has grown to encompass numerous sequels. I can't even speak today, guys. Numerous sequels and various genres, incorporating elements of action, exploration, and puzzle solving. That was a big thing that those games were well known for, was the puzzle solving in them. And they had a lot of good puzzles, a lot of good hard puzzles that you can really... it was very intense. These were the kind of games where you needed a game guide or somebody who's already played through the game. You know, you needed some kind of help. Like, how do I get through this? How do I do that? I remember when I played the first Resident Evil. And the first entry that I owned, actually, was the director's cut. And it was the DualShock version. This is when Sony incorporated their DualShock controller, which had the dual sticks on it and the vibration feature. And they released 2 variants of the director's cut. And what the director's cut does, I think it adds a few more scenes to the live action FMV full motion video scenes in the beginning and the end. I think it adds a little bit more gore to it. The music changes also, like the music is different between the games. So the variant that I played was the DualShock version of the director's cut. And if you go back and play either version, you could definitely tell what they changed in the game, especially music-wise. And I think some of them, well, I think like another thing they changed was the camera angles, because the camera angles definitely differ in certain areas of the game too. I guess to give it a little bit more eerie aspect, you know, eerie environmental. I can't even think of the word for it. It just, I guess, to try to make it a little bit more scarier or a little bit more mysterious. Like, you don't know what's coming around that corner. Plus, anybody could tell you that Resident Evil, as it's well known as, you know, the granddaddy, or sort of the granddaddy of survival horror, but it wasn't. It really isn't. That was like, I think they went to Alone in the Dark. Yeah, because Alone in the Dark was one of the first ones to do that with the exploration and the survival horror. But I think Resident Evil, I want to say Resident Evil kick-started it in a way. Like, it wasn't the first survival horror game, but it's kind of like when you look at movies. Look at slasher movies, horror movies, like the slasher genre. You had slasher movies dating back to the 1960s with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and then moving on up into the 70s, you know, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas. And they usually say, like, a slasher film is a film where there's a body count. The killer takes out, you know, numerous people in the movie, you know, different ways. Oh, Empire, Splatterhouse was the first. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. That was one of the first, way back on the Sega Genesis. I think it also came out on Super Nintendo. I can't remember. It was one of those consoles. But yeah, that's like the slasher genre. Like, nobody paid too much attention to the slasher genre at the time. And like I said, you had movies like The Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, slasher films like that. But it didn't really get blown into the mainstream until John Carpenter's Halloween came out. And then the slasher genre was pretty much blown wide open for everybody. And that's how I feel like with Resident Evil. That's how I feel with this game. It's like, it's not the first survival horror game out there, but it pretty much kickstart the whole genre of survival horror, even including, you know, action-oriented gameplay to it as well. So let's see. We'll cover elements of action, exploration, puzzle solving, and storylines inspired by horror and action films. Actually, I think I'm going to talk about the movies. when I get into it. But I think at one point, I think George Romero was interested in doing one of the movies because he loved the game so much. He loved where the games went. So George Romero, I want to say that Resident Evil was heavily inspired by Romero's version of the zombies, in a sense, because Romero's zombies, they you know, when you first seen them, they were human. You know, there was no decaying flesh or anything. They were just they're not brainless, but it's almost like they're kind of sleepwalking in a way, and they hunger for human flesh. And with these games, it focuses a little bit on that, but these zombies are deteriorating. They got limbs hanging off. They don't really look, you know, the best. They don't look like they did in Romero's version, but it's it's almost about the same. So let's see. You know, they took a lot of inspiration from the horror and action films. Resident Evil has been credited for popularizing survival horror games, as I just said, as well as repopularizing zombies in the mainstream popular culture in the late 90s onwards, along with games for the Sega Dreamcast known as House of the Dead. Those were light gun games, actually. Light gun games, they were pretty interesting back in the day. If you had a light gun accessory for like PlayStation or Sega Dreamcast, they were pretty fun. You know, you just aim at the screen. Nowadays, you can't do it because those light guns, those accessories, they don't read HD TVs or 4K TVs. They are more known toward the tube TVs with the backlit screen and all that. And it's just something about the screen. I guess the lighting of it, it's more effective on the accessory than, I guess, an HD TV because it doesn't put out too much light. I guess if that's how you want to put it. It's a backlit screen. That's basically all it is. It's like watching one of those old ass boxy TVs, the ones that weigh like 500 pounds, and you need like 2 or 3 people to load that shit in your house. Well, let's see. Leading to a renewed interest in zombie films during the 2000s. So it pretty much re-kick-started that whole zombie thing with movies. Resident Evil is Capcom's best-selling video game franchise with over 95 million sold worldwide by 2019. The Resident Evil films are also the highest grossing film series based on the video game. So, if you're not a fan of the movie franchise, hey, what's going on over there on YouTube? I see you. How you doing? Welcome to the podcast. If you're not a fan of the Resident Evil films, like, you can say what you want about Resident Evil in film format. They did pretty good. I enjoyed them for what they were. Now, I'm not going to get into the movies today. I will be talking about them in the future episodes. I will say I enjoyed the movies for what they were because I love the franchise all around. Even though there may be a couple entries in the franchise that are tongue-in-cheek or not very popular with fans or anybody else who's ever played any of these games. But I did enjoy the movies. They were pretty fun. And I'll get into those in a future episode. Like I said, each episode of Tune In Live is going to focus on an entry in the franchise. So today we're talking about the very first. The history of Resident Evil, right around when they made this game. It was the development of the game. It was also released in Japan as Biohazard. If you guys, if that was a little bit of trivia that you guys didn't know about. Resident Evil is known as Resident Evil over here, but over in Japan, of course, you know, other countries is going to be known as something else. And it was known as Biohazard, which is I guess you can call it a proper name for the game, Biohazard, because it's an outbreak. It's an outbreak of a virus, you know, starting out in a lab, in a mansion, deep in the forest somewhere, you know, in Raccoon City, and it's an outbreak. So, the development began in 1993 when Capcom's Takuro Fujiwara, I hate pronouncing these names. At least some of these are easy to pronounce, like Shinji Mikami. I've heard that name before, that's how I know how to pronounce that. And his co-workers to create a game using elements from Fujiwara's 1989 game Sweet Home. That game appeared on the NES. and I never got to play it, but I've seen and heard different takes on that game, Sweet Home. And you could definitely tell if you watch gameplay for it, if you look it up on YouTube or anything, Sweet Home for NES, it definitely has a lot going on for it, and you could see where it was an inspiration to Resident Evil. The survival horror, being stuck in a mansion, trying to escape, even the animations of the doors opening and closing, they took that heavily from that game. When in late 1994, marketing executives were setting up to release Biohazard in the United States, it was pointed out that securing the rights to the name Biohazard would be very difficult as a DOS game had it been registered under that name, as well as New York hardcore punk band called Biohazard. I think I've heard of them. Biohazard, the punk rock band. Let's see, where did I leave? Okay. A contest was held among company personnel to choose a new name for it. This competition turned up Resident Evil, the name under which it was released in the West. Resident Evil made its debut on the PlayStation in 1996 and was later ported to Sega Saturn. Okay, so it came out like a few months later, I want to say. The first entry in the series was the first game to be dubbed as survival horror, a term coined for the new genre it initiated, and its critical and commercial success, which led to 2 sequels. Resident Evil 2, which came out in 98, and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which came out in 99, both a year apart and both turning up on the Sega, on the Sony PlayStation. And they also had ports to other platforms as well. They were both on PC. And I want to say, okay, RE2 came out on several platforms. We'll talk about that one next time. But this is getting into a lot with the whole franchise here, so I'm not going to deal with that. I'm trying to find... Alright, let's see. I already read portions of that. Okay. So, the game's plot follows 2 characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, members of an elite task force known as STARS, as they investigate the outskirts of Raccoon City following the disappearance of their team members. They soon become trapped in a mansion infested with zombies and other monsters. The player, which is, of course, you, having to select to play as Chris or Jill at the start of the game, must explore the mansion to uncover secrets. I want to ask you all in the chat, okay? We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. When you play this game, who do you usually pick for the game? Because when you play Resident Evil, not only does it have 2 or 3 different difficulty settings, you got, what is it, easy, normal, and hard, and I think when you get to the director's cut versions, there's a 4th one. Leon didn't come in till Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 1 was only 2 characters, Chris and Jill. But we'll cover RE2 probably tomorrow or Tuesday. But with RE1, I mean, if you haven't played RE1, that's fine. Usually I would pick, Chris was pretty good. I would say because Chris was a little bit more strong. He had some better weapons. He could pick up better weapons. I guess he was a little bit more stronger or something. I don't know. My pick was always Jill. Now, don't get me wrong. I like playing as Chris. I love the character Chris. But with Jill, you have it a little bit more easy with Jill. For instance, she carries around a lockpick. And there's a lot of doors that are locked. And as Chris, if you want to get through those doors, you gotta look around, search desk drawers and different areas for little keys. And those keys take up a lot of your inventory. Like, one little key you pick up is not going to open up every single door. You gotta constantly pick keys up to open the doors. And that was a pain in the ass for me, was having to go around and finding keys for these doors just to get into different areas. That's what I liked about Jill. That's one thing I liked about Jill was you had a lockpick. You had a lot more going on for Jill. Plus, I think Jill held 2 more items. Yeah, she would hold up to, I can't remember if it was 6 or 8. I think it was 8. It was either 8 or 6. No. It was 8. She carried up to 8, and Chris carried up to 6. So with Chris, you had to find a backpack in order to carry 2 more items. So Jill, starting right out, she already has a couple positive things going on for her. You know, she's got more inventory space. She has the lockpick. RE1 on PlayStation was difficult until cheats came out. Yeah, I will say, even though I beat RE1 without cheats several times, when I first started playing it, yeah, Game Shark came in handy. Game Shark was definitely a very handy tool when it came to playing those games, because it was difficult at the time. Resident Evil 1 was intensely difficult. And maybe not the first third of the game was that difficult, but once you get to a certain section where you start encountering certain creatures, such as the hunters, that's when it became difficult. You know, you got these things, these mutant frogs with these long-ass claws hopping at you, and one swipe just fucking decapitate you, and you're dead. And it took a lot of bullets to take them down. Like, I think it was like 2 or 3 shotgun shells that would take those hunters down. And then, of course, you got the the boss battles, too. Like, who could forget that giant plant that you fight out there in the fucking garden house? Oh, my God. It was like you either just went in with all the ammo you had and just blasted it until your other character came in. I think, like, yeah, with Jill, Barry would come and save you. And if you're playing as Chris, it was Rebecca. So either way, whoever you play with, you do have a side character that you interact with throughout the game that can help you out. Like with Barry, he'll tell you where to go, you know, what's more helpful. He'll give you some items like herbs or ammo and stuff like that. Rebecca, like I said, Chris is a little bit more difficult because there's certain areas that only Rebecca can access. For example, the piano room. Jill could play the piano. All you need to do is push a bookcase out of the way, find the music piece, and then play the music on the piano. Whereas with Chris, he didn't know a lick of fucking music. He had to wait for Rebecca to come in, and then you gotta wait for, I can't remember how many minutes it was. It's like you gotta continue exploring around the house while she's sitting in that room trying to play the piece, which was Moonlight Sonata. And then when you finally come back, it's like she almost plays it perfectly, but not as perfect as Jill, just to open a door to get an item to put on the wall in the main dining hall. That was just something. It did make it a little bit more difficult, yes, for that. And then, of course, within the game, as you're going along from the beginning, if you're playing as Chris, Jill disappears. And it turns out Jill is locked away in a cell deep down in Umbrella's laboratory, which you open up later on. Or if you're playing as Jill, you gotta go free Chris from down there. And then, of course, the big surprise, what I'll get to in a little bit, which leads up to that. So, where did I leave off at before this thing cuts off on me? So, yeah, they all right. Where did I leave off at? Okay, they went and investigated the outskirts of Raccoon City, following the disappearance of their team members, which was Bravo Team. I think it was Bravo Team or Alpha. It was one of those teams that disappeared, and then they went in after them to look for them. They soon began trapped in a mansion infested by zombies and other monsters, of course. All right, conceived by producers producer Takuro Fujiwara as a remake of the earlier horror game Sweet Home, as I explained earlier. The development of Resident Evil was led by Shinji Mikami. It was led through several designs, initially conceived as a Super NES game back in 1993. Can you imagine when this game came out? Or if it came out around that time, if it came out on Super Nintendo? I could probably see it working, but at the same time, that would have been pretty difficult to handle. Like, some of those like, when a game console comes out, you got so many developers who work on titles that they try to push the limits of the hardware with certain consoles. This would have probably pushed the limits of the Super Nintendo when it came out. And then, of course, I mean, that would have been something. I mean, after all, they did make a Resident Evil port for Game Boy Color, and that was actually very interesting. I played that for a little bit. That was something else. To play Resident Evil on Game Boy. Game Boy, which only has 2 main buttons, and Resident Evil utilizes, what, 5, 6 of them? Alright, so it would have came out on SNES 1993. Then, as a fully 3D first-person PlayStation game in 1994, and then finally a third-person game with pre-rendered backdrops. Gameplay consists largely of a third-person action with added emphasis on inventory management, exploration, and puzzle solving. Resident Evil establishes many conventions seen later in the series, including the control scheme, inventory system, save system, and use of 3D models superimposed over pre-rendered backgrounds. It was very well received critically and commercially. Code Veronica, part of RE1. No, it was part of the storyline. I will cover Code Veronica in the future, but it was part of a storyline, sort of. It wasn't part of RE1, but it's a continuation of the games that followed. It's a true sequel to RE. Well, not a true sequel to RE1, but it's a sequel within that franchise. But I will get to that in the next 3 episodes. Let's see. Where did I leave off at? Okay, beyond video games, Resident Evil has been credited with repopularizing zombies in the mainstream popular culture from the late 90s onward, along with House of the Dead, leading to a renewed interest in zombie films in the 2000s. Resident Evil has since been hailed as one of the greatest video games of all time. Its success has spawned a multimedia franchise, including video games, films, comics, novels, and other merchandise. The game has received dedicated ports to the Sega Saturn, Microsoft Windows, and Nintendo DS. In 2002, a remake of the same name, was released on GameCube, featuring updated graphics, sound, and changes to the gameplay and story. A high-definition remaster of the GameCube version was released in 2015 for modern platforms. And of course, we've seen the sequel, which came out last year for Resident Evil 2, and a prequel, Resident Evil 0, which came out in 2002. So, I've played all versions of Resident Evil. PC, at the time, the PC I had, it ran it, but it didn't run it too good. I think I ran it on a laptop. This was like a late 90s laptop, mid to late 90s version of the laptop. It played Resident Evil 2 on it pretty decently, but it had, some sluggish issues. RE1, I would have had to find a copy of like a computer convention show or something, pretty cheap. Now the DS version, that came out, when did that came out? It was Resident Evil DS. That came out, I want to say in 2005 or 6. Yes, it was in 2005 or 6 when I got that. As I remember, I was sitting at work, and the job I had, it was boring at night, so I'd bring a game with me and play. And I had one of the original Nintendo DSs at the time. This is like 2006, around that time period. And I was shocked. I was excited when I heard that Resident Evil was hitting Nintendo DS. And I was like, holy shit, I can't wait to get this game and just play it anywhere. I could sit there at work and play Resident Evil. And it played pretty good. Not a lot of people was a fan of the Nintendo DS version. I liked it because I love Resident Evil. I love playing it. I mean, it had a very interesting concept with the touchscreen, where you use the stylus to slice across the touchscreen to use a knife. But that was only in certain areas of the game that you needed that. But I enjoyed it. And it was very rare. Like, when I went to pick the game up, I got it at Walmart. And not soon after that, the game sold out or it was discontinued because, like, a few years after that, I went back to look for the game. And it was very hard to find. Like, I was lucky to find it in a GameStop in one of their cases. and it was $30. And that a game like that, you know, that's discontinued because it wasn't very popular with, you know, fans of the DS, or maybe it was a very poor port to some. I enjoyed it, and it's a very rare hard game to find. Like, if I look up on eBay right now as I'm talking to you guys, I'm gonna look this up. Well, let's see, Resident Evil DS. It's called Deadly Silence. Right now, you can get it with the case for $44.99, and this is complete. Nintendo DS 2006. This is the case, the booklet, the game, everything. Tested original. And it looks like it recently had a GameStop sticker on it, because you could see smudges or residue of the sticker that was once on there. So it's used, but somebody's got it on there for $45. That's a rare game. Then there's one, let's see, 2110. Somebody's selling it for $21. It's pretty rare. And yeah, here's another one, complete rare. I don't know if it's like in the jewel, you know, like in the wrapping and all, but yeah, $50, $40. It's very rare. There's even the cart only. Somebody's selling the cart only for $33.99. So you'd be lucky if you get your hands on that game. It's available for the Nintendo DS. You can play it on the 3DS, because the 3DS does play DS cartridges as well. But yeah, that is a very rare find, and I was happy to see that when it came out around then. And then you had the remake that came out on the GameCube. I could talk about the remake for a little bit. So they reintroduced it, you know, to the newer console generation at the time, back in 2002, and they did a phenomenal job remaking Resident Evil, and they made it more scarier. I mean, it was very terrifying. You know, everything, like, there was no, you know, pre-rendered backgrounds or anything. Everything had an animation to it. You know, the weather elements outside, like the rain, the thunder. They made it terrifying again. It was one of the most terrifying things to play all over again. They added some new creatures. They made it more difficult. Let's just say they made it more difficult. I actually finally beat the game a couple years ago, because I got the Origin collection on Xbox One when it came out. I think it was like 2 years ago it came out. It came out with the Resident Evil remake and Resident Evil 0. 0 I haven't beaten yet. I got maybe halfway through 0. I'm going to be working on that sometime soon. But the remake, as hard as it was, and a lot of things didn't really make too much sense, but I enjoyed it. It was difficult. It was terrifying. There was even one part in there where I kept dying, and it was because of how the controls were, and I couldn't get with the controls. So I had to switch from like the joystick to the class, because with the joystick they make it to where you can move all over the place. It wasn't the classic tank controls, because tank controls still existed in those games, sort of, but you know, they had the camera angles were pretty much fixed to third person. I think no, it wasn't. It was still fixed camera angles. Third person didn't hit until Resident Evil 4. I'm sorry. But the camera angles didn't work out too well with the way the joystick was for the remake on the for the port on the Xbox One. So luckily there was an option in the settings to switch between using your joystick, you know, the way everybody plays Resident Evil or any other games nowadays. You had a choice to turn on the tank controls, and I turned the tank controls on, and that helped me out at one particular spot. So that still came in handy, and I was still able to get by that. But the enemies in there were more difficult. They had more enemies. The mansion had bigger expansions to it. They had more hallways and more rooms. Like, when you go into it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this. And then you go into a hallway, and you see another hallway expanding out from one corner, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't remember this shit being here. And it's interesting. And you explored it too. So the exploration was a little bit more confusing at the time, but it was fun. You didn't know what you were going to come across, around the corner. And the zombies, the way they utilize the zombies in there, it was very interesting. Even though you think you downed a zombie, even though you think you killed a zombie, you didn't really truly kill them because their body's still going to lay there. You know how, like in the original, the bodies disappear. You don't see them after a while. After you leave the room and come back, the bodies are gone. In the remake, the bodies are still there. And they'll remain there for like 2 or 3 passes through that hallway. Now, the one thing they added, which was a very tedious thing, but it made the game more difficult, especially with the inventory management, because you would have to carry around a lighter and some gasoline, and you would have to set the bodies on fire, because if you didn't do that, they would come back as like crimson heads, they called them. They were more difficult. They were more, they were a little bit more faster, and they hit harder. So you would have a little bit more hard time putting them down when they come back as crimson heads. I believe me, I've done quite a few of them. Because I'm like, I don't have the time to go around refueling a gas tank and then burning a corpse. I don't have time for that. I'm trying to get out of here. I'm trying to get through the game. But they made it a little bit more difficult, so it's like you can either take care of them now like that, or if you gotta come back through this hallway later on, that's it. So that was pretty interesting with the game. I don't remember a whole lot of the remake. Like I said, yeah, I beat it once, and I can't remember a whole lot about it. I know they added some new mini bosses to there. They added some new enemies. It made it more difficult. I'm gonna have to play through it again, just to get a whole new feel for it as well. So the gameplay of Resident Evil. The player's character is a member of a special law enforcement task force who was trapped in a mansion populated by dangerous mutated creatures. The objective of the game is to uncover the mystery of the mansion and ultimately escape alive. The game's graphics consist of real-time 3D polygonal characters and objects superimposed over pre-rendered backdrops with fixed camera angles. The player controls a character by pushing the D-pad or analog sticks left and right to rotate the character, and then move the character forward and backwards by pushing the D-pad up and down. Hence the term tank controls. Not a lot of people are a fan of tank controls, but it's hit or miss depending on the game you play. Because there's quite a few games out there that utilize tank controls. Silent Hill for one, Alone in the Dark, all those early games right there. To fulfill the game's objective, the player uncovers various documents that provide exposition about the game's narrative, as well as clues that help them solve various puzzles in the mansion. Key items are also available that give the player access to other items in new areas. The player can arm their character with weapons to defend themselves from enemies, although the ammunition available for each firearm is limited, and the player must learn to conserve the ammo they have for the situations that they really need it. To restore the character's health, the player uses first aid sprays or 3 types of healing herbs that can be mixed together in different combinations for different healing effects. I gotta say something about that, okay? In a world, in a generation, in today's light, what do people do most of? Smoke weed. People smoke fucking weed today. I'm not a fan of it myself. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. Never will smoke. I mean, I'm not going to put anybody down who does. It's just not my thing. But look at a game that comes out in the mid-90s when you got all these PSAs on TV telling you, don't smoke pot, don't go in that direction, pot's bad for you, because, pot is a drug. I mean, not to go all political on it, but, in my opinion, marijuana is a drug. A drug is something that alters your mindset, that alters your body in some way. Pot is probably the more positive drug for you in a sense, but still, pot is considered a drug. But you gotta figure, in the mid to late 90s or even early 90s, you know, the whole decade of the 90s, you see all these PSAs talking about how bad pot is for you, don't smoke pot. But then comes a game like Resident Evil, where what is the one thing that heals you? Herbs. Now, with all the jokes coming out like, oh yeah, I healed myself, I'm smoking some pot. You know, it's like, do you smoke the shit or do you rub it on the wound? Does it give you a high? You know, medical herbs. Like, oh, look at today, we got medical marijuana. I guess you can consider that medical herbs. I don't know. So you got a game back in the day, you walking around saying, hey, look, there's some weed. Let's sit in the corner and hit some shit up. We'll heal ourselves, you know? Can you imagine sitting there, rolling up a big fucking joint, smoking that shit in the corner, and you're looking down and this fucking big old scratch on your arm starts healing? And you're like, holy shit, dude, look at that. It's closing up, man. I don't know what the fuck I'm smoking, but damn, I can fucking move again. That's like later on, like Resident Evil 7. I'll mention it right now, just because I'm talking about herbs. Like there was like a cutscene where your character in 7 loses his arm or loses his foot at one point, and the guy gives him a fucking herbal juice, and he pours it on his fucking wound, and then he attaches his leg or his arm, and it's like, boom, it's right there. It's working again. All, you know, the limbs are working, and he can walk, he can move his arm and shit. Like, can you imagine that? Like, what if they made a particular herb? What if they took weed and they utilized it, and they said, hey, if this shit can heal somebody in a video game, can it heal somebody in real life? I don't know. Go take a visit to Baltimore with a fucking bag of weed. Have somebody shoot you and smoke the whole bag and see if that works. I'm sorry, but that's how it seems like in this game. You're smoking pot, you're healing yourself. You know, this fucking zombie just bit you on the neck. You're about to turn into another zombie. What do? Smoke a big fucking doobie that heals up the goddamn wound in your neck. Does it kill the virus in you too? I don't know. It's just something I had to say. It's something I've said for so many years. I just had to get it out. Let's see. The carrying capacity of the player is limited depending on the character, and the items that the player does not wish to carry at the moment can be stored in the item box to be retrieved for later use. That weed does neutralize cancer. Well, that's not really a proven fact. I mean, I haven't seen any actual studies that prove it is. Nobody's come out and said it does. So, I mean, it's speculation right now, but that's all politics. But yeah, talking about this inventory system, that was always the biggest issue with Resident Evil, especially the first one. You gotta think, you're picking up medical items, the oil from THC. I don't know about that. I mean, if it did heal cancer, I mean, it'd be all over the news. You know, people be like, hey, I found a cure for cancer, but it's not in the video game. But talking about the inventory system, you gotta figure you're carrying weapons. What weapons suit you? What weapons are going to do the most damage? You're carrying ammo, first aid items, keys, items that are used to open certain doors or solve certain puzzles. And in the first game, mind you, playing as Chris, you only have 6 slots. Jill has 8 slots. So depending on the room you're going to next, you got to manage your items carefully to say, okay, which keys do I need? How much ammo do I need? Then, of course, there's the save feature where you got to use ink ribbons. You got to find ink ribbons throughout the whole place in order to use them on a typewriter to save your game. So those are usually stuff that you can, you know, if you go into a room, you can just pull them out of the box for a second, save your game, then put them back in the box. It's a tedious mess. I mean, it's something that was carried on in the other sequels as well. But that was my big issue. You know, try speed running Resident Evil when you need the inventory box. When you need to visit the inventory box to get out a key that you need. 50 rounds for your pistol or 20 rounds for your shotgun. I've done it numerous times. No matter how many times I've played and beat the game, there's always that issue where if I forgot what I need, when I need, for a certain room I need to go to, if I forget what I need and I'll get like halfway there and I'll be like, oh shit, I need to get this. I need to do that. So I gotta backtrack all the way back to that room, open up the fucking box, take out what I need, go there, and then again I'll be like, I forgot one fucking thing. It's always something, especially if you go to the room, like let's say about a fifth of the way, maybe a quarter of the way through the game, you're fighting this giant snake in the attic. And you're going to end up having to pick up a piece for a door after you defeat him. And the snake takes quite a few hits to take down. You got Barry who gives you... if you're playing as Jill, you got Barry who gives you some grenade rounds. And it's only 6. You'll find some more throughout, the first part of the game, along with the grenade launcher, I think. But that's not really enough, especially if you end up missing, and missing when you're trying to shoot them. And then, of course, the fucker wraps itself around you, and it ends up biting you. And, of course, what happens when he bites you? You get poisoned. So then you got to make your way around. You got to find certain herbs to mix together, that'll cure your poison, and then you're fine. It's just certain things like that, but they add the elements to survival. That's why they coined the term survival horror, because, you're trying to survive in this place, and you got all elements against you. All right, so we talked about the capacity. Okay, save the progress. Already talked about that. You must pick up an ink ribbon, use it in typewriters. However, the supply of ink ribbons that the player can acquire is limited, much like the player's ammo and healing supplies. Players will encounter and fight various infected creatures, such as flesh-eating zombies, undead dogs, giant spiders, and other monsters. Yes, I was one of those people back in the day. When I first started playing the game, yeah, I jumped when you first went down that hall with the windows, and the first dog jumps out at you, and you're like, holy shit. And it's not just one dog that jumps through, it's 2 of them. Nowadays, if I play through, I'm just like, I just run right through. I just run right past it. I don't even bother shooting the fucking dogs. Because later on, when you go through the hallway, you got giant spiders to worry about. Motherfuckers will, bite you to death and poison you. I hated those goddamn things. Let's see, the setting for the game. A series of bizarre murders have occurred in the outskirts of Raccoon City, with signs of cannibalism on the victims' remains. The Raccoon Police Department Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, are assigned to investigate the murders. STARS is divided into 2 teams, Alpha and Bravo. Bravo is the first to be sent, but after contact with them is lost, Alpha team is sent to investigate their disappearance. And that's how the story begins. Characters. Players can choose between the 2 Alpha Stars members, Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, each of them with their own unique differential abilities. Jill has more firepower and possesses a lockpick that enables her to access areas and items easily, as well as an inventory large enough to hold up to 8 items, as I was stating before, which is why I mostly picked Jill Valentine. While Chris has limited firepower and is more durable in terms of taking damage from enemies, and a smaller inventory that can hold only 6 items. The game's supporting characters include Barry Burton, Alpha's team's weapons expert who provides Jill with additional firepower, Rebecca Chambers, a surviving member of Bravo team who supports Chris with her medical expertise, Albert Wesker, the captain of STARS and the leader of the Alpha team, and Brad Vickers, who you really don't even see. You only hear his voice in the first game. You don't even see him. He's the helicopter pilot. He's the helicopter pilot who sends transmissions to them as he tries to find them in the helicopter. He earned the nickname Chicken Heart. Motherfucker didn't stick around long when everybody was being eaten and attacked. He decides to take off in the goddamn chopper. The other characters of the STARS include Joseph Frost, the 6th member of Alpha Team whose sudden death sets the story into motion. Enrico Marini, the leader of Bravo Team who gives the player the game's most critical plot twist. Richard Aiken, a player, let's see, yeah, he gives the player a radio used to receive Brad's transmissions. Kenneth J. Sullivan, a member of Bravo team, killed just after Alpha Team arrives. I can't even speak today. But yeah, Kenneth is the first corpse that you come across with the first zombie. He's the one that's getting eaten in the hall. And then you got Forrest Speyer, whose corpse is found on the balcony by the other player. That's another thing. The other enemy that you come across when you find whose body was that again? Yeah, Forrest. When you find Forrest, not Gump. Forrest from Resident Evil. Those crows. Who hates them fucking crows? A goddamn bird. They are so annoying in that game. They're only in, I think. Let's see. You got the balcony. You got the picture room. I think there's some outside in another area. So there's only like maybe 2 or 3 areas that you find them birds in, and they're so annoying. You know, if you're not running fast enough or running around them good enough, you're going to get pecked to death. I hate dealing with them motherfuckers. So the story goes, on July 24th, 1998, when a series of bizarre murders occur in the outskirts of the fictional Midwestern town of Raccoon City. The Raccoon City Police Department STARS team are assigned to investigate. After contact with Bravo team is lost, Alpha team is sent to investigate their disappearance. Alpha team locates Bravo team's crashed helicopter and land at the site, when they are suddenly attacked by a pack of monstrous dogs, killing team member Joseph Frost. After Alpha team's helicopter pilot, Brad Vickers, panics and takes off alone, the remaining team members of the team, Chris, Jill, Albert, and Barry, are forced to seek refuge in the nearby mansion that, of course, is abandoned. Depending on which character the player assumes control of, either Chris or Barry are separated from the rest of the team during the chase and do not make it to the mansion. At this point, the team decides to split up and investigate. Over the course of the game, the player character who may encounter several members of the Bravo team, including Enrico, the captain of the STARS Bravo team, who reveals that Alpha team's member, or one of the members, is a traitor before being shot and killed by an unseen assailant. The player character eventually learns that a series of illegal experiments are being undertaken by a clandestine research team with under the authority and supervision of a biomedic company, Umbrella Corporation. Sorry, my words are stumbling. Still kind of tired, and I got a cold coming on. That's why I sound the way I sound tonight. Alright, so Umbrella. These creatures roaming the mansion and its surrounding areas are the result of these experiments, which have exposed the mansion's personnel. Every time I see that word, it's like, is it personal or personnel? I don't know. It's the way the word looks, I guess. When you first see it, you're thinking personal, but it's personnel. Mansion's personnel and various animals and insects to a highly contagious and mutagenic I can't fucking read. Mutagenic biological agent known as a T-virus. Eventually, the player's character discovers a secret underground laboratory containing Umbrella's experiments. In the lab, the player encounters Wesker, who reveals that he's a double agent working for Umbrella, and plans to use the Tyrant, a giant humanoid sub-soldier, to kill the remaining STARS members. However, in an ensuing confrontation, Wesker is supposedly killed, and the player's character defeats the Tyrant. After activating the lab's self-destructive system, the player reaches the heliport and manages to contact Brad for extraction, at which by the player may be confronted by Tyrant one last time. The game features multiple endings depending on the player's actions at key points over the course of the game. So that's another interesting thing that I like about the game, at least the first one. You have multiple endings to the first game, and there's different FMVs, full motion video sequences that show the ending, the true endings. You got, I think you got like 2 or 3 for Chris, who escape with Rebecca, or don't escape with Rebecca. You got Jill, who escapes with Barry, escapes with Chris. Depending on the difficulty setting that you're playing the game on, depending on your actions, like whether you decide to go down into the laboratory to save Chris or save Jill, depending on those actions. And I think on the harder difficulties too, like you said, like if you're playing on easy, you'll only have to fight the tyrant once down in the lab after it kills Wesker. But if you're playing on a harder difficulty, once you get on the heliport once again and you send a flare up in the air for Brad to see, tyrant comes busting up through the damn floor and you gotta fight him again. But this time you get a little bit more leeway, even though he fucking shoots himself at you and claws you to death, up until the point where Brad decides, here, Jill, take this rocket launcher. Flings a rocket launcher down at you, and you take one shot, and he's dead. That's actually became a staple in other Resident Evil entries, is when somebody gives you a rocket launcher to use. For the endings, there are 4 endings, with the outcome being determined on whether they rescue the other 2 survivors or not. The character who is not chosen by the player is in prison in a solitary cell in the mansion's underground lab, as I explained. In order to access the cell, the player has to collect a set of MO discs distributed within the mansion and use them in different decoding devices to unlock the door. So there's like 3 MO discs that you gotta find throughout the mansion, and you gotta explore every single room, every single corner to get them. To get the best ending, the player must rescue the other protagonists in addition to their assigned partner. The best ending has Chris and Jill escaping the mansion alongside a third STARS member, either Rebecca or Barry, depending on who the player is playing as, after defeating the tyrant and destroying the mansion. The second best ending is the player, Chris or Jill, escaping with his or her partner, Barry or Rebecca, after defeating the tyrant and destroying the mansion. The second worst ending is Jill and Chris escaping as the only 2 survivors, with the mansion still intact and the tyrant settling loose in the forest. The very worst ending is the player character as the sole survivor, with the mansion still intact and the tyrant still set loose on the forest. I've gotten that. I've actually gotten all those endings too. As many times as I beat the game, I've gotten all those endings as well. It's a pain in the ass on how to get some of them. So that was the backdrop of the story. When I played it, when I first played the game, I remember, because I got it for Christmas one year. I think it was 97 or 98. No, it was 98, I think. Because I got it for Christmas or Easter or something. And I played it, and I got stuck in one particular area. And this was around the time when, you know, my uncle, he had all the games. Him and my cousin, they beat him several times. And when I went to visit my grandparents, and my uncle, my cousin were hanging, you know, we're over there, and I'd be like, how do you get past this one area? I took my memory card, I took the game with me, and my cousin showed me what to do. I'm like, really? I didn't know how to do that. So, did that, went through, saw the end of the game. I was like, oh, okay, well, now I know what to do. Because those type of games, you know, as long as you play them, certain things you'll remember, and then certain things like today, if you don't have a game guide, you got places like YouTube where you can look on there and find out how to do this, how to do that. Like, I can go through the game, certain areas I could forget, like where certain keys are at and all, but I can remember most of it. I could sit there and play it for like 3 hours and beat it. But it's just one of those games that a lot of people are like, oh, I played it once, beat it, oh well, not going back to it. But it's just one of those, like, even though you see all the endings and all, it doesn't have any other special content to unlock. Well, it does have some content to unlock. You actually get a key to a wardrobe room with either character. You can go and access extra costumes. If you play it on the hardest difficulty, and I think if you beat it in under 5 hours, you get the infinite rocket launcher. I did get that at one point. That was pretty fun. So put away your pistols and your shotguns. Just take the rocket launcher. Even though it takes a bit to aim it, and then shoot it, but it's still powerful. Like, you could be in a fucking hall of zombies and you just pull it up and you just fire on all of them and you're good. Like, it obliterates everything in one shot. So just run around the fucking mansion, the laboratory and all with just a rocket launcher. There's a lot going on here for the production of the game. Holy shit. I don't even know if I want to talk about the production. But let me talk about the releases, the different releases. Holy shit, there's like, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 releases, different ports of the game. So the game originally released in a big box form for PlayStation first. And that's the version that a lot of people played. The version I came into was a director's cut. Now, like I said, there's 2 variants of the director's cut, and I'm going to talk about them real quick. The first director's cut is an updated version, which was released on PlayStation September 97, a year and a half after the original game. Director's cut was produced to compensate for the highly publicized delay of the sequel, Resident Evil 2. Mind you, at this time they were working on Resident Evil 2. They were actually had an idea for Resident Evil 2. I even got the ROM for this. It was Resident Evil 1.5. You can find it online and you can play it on PlayStation emulators. But mind you, it's not even the whole game. It's maybe half the game. I haven't even tried it out myself yet. I'm actually gonna probably try it out sometime this week. But 1.5 is originally supposed to be the original Resident Evil 2, but it never got finished. So while they were working on 2, they give people a director's cut of the first one. So it was highly publicized delay of the sequel, and was originally bundled with the playable pre-release demo of that game. The Japanese version of the demo disc also included pre-release demo of Rockman Neo, later retitled Rockman Mash or Mega Man Legends over here in America, and a trailer for the newly released Breath of Fire 3. I think that's a RPG. I think I got it downloaded. I haven't tried it out yet. The main addition of the director's cut is an arranged mode of the game that changes the location of nearly every vital item in the mansion, as well as the enemy placement. Never choose arranged mode. I've actually played arranged mode a couple times, and yeah, it's definitely different. They change everything around in there. Like, if there's one hallway that has maybe 1 zombie in it, and you go in that area in arranged mode, that motherfucker, there's gonna be like 5 fucking zombies in that hallway, so fuck that. So the main character as well as Rebecca are given a new wardrobe, and the player's handgun is replaced by an improved model where any shots fired have a random chance of decapitating a zombie, killing them instantly. That's what I liked about the director's cut. There were certain zombies, if I shot a regular pistol at them, their heads would explode after 2 or 3 shots. That's what I liked about that. So it didn't really take, some of them didn't really take like 5 or 6 shots to take down. It'd be like 2 or 3 shots and then their head explode. That was it. The original version of the game is also included as well, along with a new beginner mode where the enemies are easier to kill and the amount of ammunition that can be found by the player is doubled. Additionally, the auto-aim function was restored in all modes, though it is not noted in the in-game controls. That was another feature, too. I've always played it with beginner mode. That was the easiest mode. But then again, with beginner mode, you get the worst endings as well, where the tyrant's still alive and running amok in the forest and shit. But beginner mode was always easy. Like they said, the enemies are easier to take down. The amount of ink ribbons and ammo that you pick up is doubled. So if you're used to picking up 15 bullets, 15 bullet clips at a time, it's doubled to 30, which is pretty cool. You know, you could double your ammo. That way you ain't gotta worry about running all over the mansion, you know, opening this door and that door and checking every single drawer for bullets. The North American and European releases of the director's cut were marketed as featuring the original uncensored footage from the Japanese releases. However, the full motion video sequences were still censored, and Capcom claimed the omission was the result of the localization mistake by the developers. The uncensored intro was later offered as a free download from their website. The French and German PAL versions of the director's cut do feature the uncensored intro FMV in color, though they lack the censored Kenneth death scene. Although the PC version of Resident Evil was not billed as the director's cut version of the game, it is the only version of Resident Evil that has all the uncensored SMVs, which include the censored introduction, Kenneth death scene, and the entirety and the ending as well. But I'm pretty sure, like, if you look on YouTube right now, you could find those FMVs uploaded on there right now. You could find them on there. They're easy to look up. So nowadays you wouldn't even really have to get certain versions of the game just to enjoy watching a few extra seconds of these members of Bravo Team and Alpha Team getting mauled by dogs. Now, the version that I had and that my uncle had, I know he's here lurking on the Facebook vibe right there. The version we had was the director's cut DualShock version, which was a little bit different. This was a third version, co-produced by Kenji Inafune, I guess that's his name, I don't know. I can't pronounce half of these Japanese names. Was released in August of '98. This feature supports the DualShock controller's analog controls and vibration features, as well as a new symphonic soundtrack, replacing the original soundtrack by Makoto Tomozawa, I guess that's the name, Koshi Hiroki, and Masami Udia. I don't fucking know anymore. Oh, there he is. Mike's over there too. So, the symphonic music was created by composer Mamoru Samuraguchi. Hey, I pronounced it right. Although he admitted in 2014 that he directed his orchestrator, Takashi. I'm not going to read these names anymore. Fuck it. Because I'm tired of that. I'm tired of trying to butcher these names here, okay? So, it was composed by somebody else to ghostwrite the new soundtrack. The Japanese DualShock version came packaged with a bonus disc that contained downloadable save data, footage of the unused Japanese dub versions of the live action cutscenes, along with the brief gameplay footage of the canceled original version of Resident Evil 2. As I stated, was Resident Evil 1.5. And that I do have that. I'm going to try that out some point. In North America, the DualShock version was later released as a downloadable game on the PlayStation Network over on PS3, although the game is advertised as the original Director's Cut box art. In Japan and Europe, the original Director's Cut was instead made available for the PlayStation Network. That was the version I started in on, was the DualShock version. And like I said, the music is... I don't know what's version of the music is better. I like the DualShock version music a lot better, but when you play that version with the other ones, you could definitely tell a difference with the music. The Sega Saturn version, which came out a little bit later, added a unlockable battle mode in which the players must traverse through a series of rooms from the main game and eliminate all enemies within them, with weapons selected by the player. It features 2 exclusive enemies not in the main game, a zombie version of Wesker and a gold-colored tyrant. I want to play as a gold-colored tyrant. I want the gold-colored tyrant, damn it. That's what I want to play as. That's pretty cool, and that's on the Sega Saturn version. I gotta find me an emulator for that, just to play that. The player's performance in the battle mode is graded at the end. The game's backgrounds were touched up to include more detail in this version. The Japanese version is the most gore-laden of all the platforms. After decapitating a crawling zombie with a kick, the head remains on the floor, and the Plant 42 can cut the character before the game's over screen. Oh, that's pretty nice. So, yeah, you can actually see him decapitating the player. Or cutting them in half or something. The Saturn version also features exclusive enemy monsters such as a reskinned breed of hunters known as ticks and a second tyrant prior to the game's final battle. Exclusive outfits for Jill and Chris were also added. This version was published in Europe by Sega instead of Capcom's usual European publisher Virgin. Remember games back then they're published by Virgin? Like Virgin, you have Virgin Mobile and you have Virgin Games. I never knew that it was published by Virgin. The Windows version, which was back in, I'm pretty sure this was supported by Windows 95 at the time. The Windows version featured uncensored footage from the Japanese version, but the opening intro is in full color rather than black and white. Support for the 3D accelerator cards was added as well, allowing for much sharper graphics. 2 new unlockable weapons were added, a MAC-10 for Jill and an FN Mini-Me. Mini-Me? That's what they called it? The FM Mini-Me for Chris. Chris gets a Mini-Me. He ain't gonna roll a fucking midget at somebody. He carries a Mini-Me. Okay. New unlockable outfits for Chris and Jill were added as well, including skipping the door animations. That was one thing I liked about the PC version. You could skip the door animations because they took so long to fucking open. Then you had the Game Boy version. I mentioned this earlier on in the show. Game Boy Color version, which was developed by House Hotgen, was supposed to be released in late 99 or early 2000 until Capcom decided to cancel the project, citing that the port was very poor quality due to the Game Boy's limited hardware. This version contains every room, cutscene, and almost all the items that were present in the PlayStation version. In January 2012, an anonymous individual claimed that an EEPROM cartridge of the Game Boy Color version, well, he had the version of it, and requested $2,000 before he was willing to leak the playable ROM. The goal was met in February, and the ROM files containing an unfinished build of the game were subsequently leaked. I gotta end this show soon. I can't read. But yeah, there is a ROM version of the game that is out there on the internet. I have it. I've played a little bit of it. It's difficult because of the limited controls. But it's interesting seeing Resident Evil on a Game Boy Color. It could have probably been something. You know, I mean, each console usually has a different port of games in some particular way. Look at the early 8-bit and 16-bit games. Like, a Sega Genesis entry of something could have better graphics and a few more levels or something that a Super Nintendo game or the Super Nintendo version of the same game doesn't have. So, I can't see why they couldn't port Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color. It could have been something. It really could have been something. Oh, wow. We got a error playback over there on YouTube. Oh, never mind. It's back up. If you're having an issue with the show on YouTube, just refresh it. Sega had a 32-bit. Yeah, Sega was 32-bit, yeah. Have another drink, I wish. I can't even get up and get me another drink, actually. Yeah, Sega Genesis was 32, or not Sega Genesis. Sega Saturn was 32-bit. Sega Genesis was 16. And then you had the Sega Master System, which came out around the NES. That was 8-bit. Let's see. Then there's the Deadly Silence, which was the Nintendo DS port, which I got back in 2006. It was released in Japan as Biohazard Deadly Silence and was made to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the series. Deadly Silence included a classic mode, the original, with minimal enhancements and touchscreen support, and a rebirth mode containing a greater number of enemies and a series of new puzzles that make use of the platform specifications. The game makes use of the dual screen display, with the top screen used as to display the map, along with the player's remaining ammunition and health, while the bottom screen display the main action. Yeah, I forgot about that. The bottom screen, the touch screen, was the main cheese of it. And can be switched to show the player's inventory. The DS version also includes updated play mechanics, a 180-degree turn featured in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, along with a knife button and tactical reload from Resident Evil 4. The updated controls are applicable, damn, to both classic and rebirth modes. Just like the PC version, the door animations can be skipped as well as the cutscenes. The live action footage is still censored, even in the Japanese release. However, the scene showing Kenneth's death severed, his severed head was kept. In Rebirth mode, new puzzles were added that use I was getting ready to say The Simpsons. the system's touchscreen. Knife battle sequences, viewed from a first-person perspective, are also added, in which the player must fend off incoming enemies by swinging the knife via the stylus. I remember that shit. That was tough as fuck, too. One particular puzzle requires the player to resuscitate an injured Conrad by blowing into the built-in microphone. This player can shake off enemies by using the touchscreen, performing a melee attack. I remember that shit. Having to blow into the microphone to resuscitate somebody. I don't know what that shit was about. I'm like, what am I fucking blowing? I'm blowing the guy through the fucking video game. Negative, because there was a separate console that was like $100, which was a Genesis. And it had cart that you put in. Actually, you are right. So, going off track here for a little bit, just to say that, yeah, you are right. See, the Sega Master System was 8-bit when that came out. The Sega Genesis itself was 16-bit. Before the Sega Saturn came out, it had a Sega CD. Sega CD played full motion videos and all. So that, in a way, I guess was 32-bit right there. And then you had the 32-bit add-on, which is the Sega 32X. Yeah, it didn't come out in 97. No, 32X did not come out in 97. I guarantee that. So if I look at this, I know the Dreamcast came out in 98 or 99. All right, Sega 32X. 32X came out in 94. It didn't come out in 97. It came out in 94. I'm looking right at it. So it came out in North America November 21st, 1994. That's right. Yeah, I forgot all about the 32X. But it played 32-bit games, but it also played 16-bit games. And then it was discontinued. The Sega Saturn came out in November of 94. And then, of course, the Dreamcast came out in 98 or 99. Yeah, you knew it was in the 90s? Yeah. I knew about it. I just forgot about the Sega 32X. I forgot all about that, yeah. But yeah, that was a 32-bit console. But the Sega Genesis itself was 16-bit. So let's get back on track here. So there was another feature that was added to Resident Evil Deadly Silence. The game also included wireless LAN support for up to 4 players with 2 different multiplayer game modes. The first was a co-op mode in which each player must help each other solve puzzles and escape the mansion together. The other is competitive mode in which the objectives is to get the highest score out of all the players by destroying the most monsters, with the toughest monsters being worth the most points. There are 3 playable multiplayer stages and 9 playable characters. Well, those are the versions, the different port versions of Resident Evil right there. That when the game came out, it got decent reviews. Looks like it got pretty decent reviews, critically acclaimed, receiving an aggregated rating of 91 out of 100 on Metacritic and all. So I've seen a lot of different ports here. Like the PlayStation version got better gradings. They got A's, 8.7 out of 10, 8.2 out of 10, 294 out of 300, 9.25 out of 10 on Game Informer. It was a pretty good game, regardless of what people think about it with the graphics, the controls, everything with it. Resident Evil is credited as sparking the revival of the zombie genre in popular culture since the late 90s, leading to renewed interest in zombie films during the 2000s. In 2013, George Romero said it was the video game Resident Evil and House of the Dead more than anything else that popularized zombies in the early 20th century pop culture. In a 2015 interview with Huffington Post, screenwriter Alex Garland credited the original Resident Evil video game as a primary influence on his script for the horror film 28 Days Later, and credited the first Resident Evil game for revitalizing the zombie genre. Shaun of the Dead star and co-writer Simon Pegg also credits the original Resident Evil game with starting the zombie revival in popular culture. as the original Resident Evil game sparked a new interest in the zombie genre. It was followed by zombie films such as 28 Days Later, Dawn of the Dead in 2004, Shaun of the Dead 28 Weeks Later, Zombieland, Cockneys vs. Zombies, and World War Z, as well as zombie-themed graphic novels and TV shows such as The Walking Dead and The Return, and books such as World War Z, which came out in 2006. That's the book, not the movie. Pride and Prejudice, and Zombies and Warm Bodies. The Resident Evil film adaptation also went on to becoming the highest grossing film series based on video games. And after they grossed more than $1 billion worldwide. The zombie revival trend was popular up until the mid-2010s, before zombie films declined in popularity by the late 2010s. So, let's see, Resident Evil wasn't popular in the early 90s until the movie started. Not really. Resident Evil popularized it. It made zombie movies popular again. That's what I was just reading. It kickstarted the genre all over again. When, Resident Evil hit the mainstream, that's when people started getting more and more back into zombie movies, the zombie genre. Because you got to think, zombies were pretty big all the way up until Day of the Dead, which came out in, 1980? Do I even dare look this up? Zombie movies died out, in the mid to late 90s. I don't want the fucking, here we go. Yeah, Day of the Dead came out in 85. Day of the Dead came out in 85. So, during that whole period, I mean, you still had zombie movies that came out, around then, after then. Even movies like Brain Dead or Dead Alive, which was a zombie movie, it's a zombie horror comedy movie, made by Peter Jackson, Mr. Lord of the Rings. But you got to figure with horror movies, it was all about slashers and all at the time, slasher genre. It was even dying out in the mid to late 90s until Wes Craven brought in Scream. But was the zombie genre, it's almost like people weren't too scared of those movies anymore. They weren't too interested in them. It wasn't even really that popular. And then you got a game like Resident Evil that comes out and slowly builds itself up. And of course the sequels come out. That's what revolutionized the zombie genre again. It kickstarted it for the early 2000s. And then you got all these zombie movies coming out, and people are about zombies, zombie apocalypse. What happens if the zombie apocalypse were to happen? Resident Evil is one to thank for kickstarting it. It may not have been too popular with some audiences because of the gameplay, the narrative. Like, it had some of the cheesiest dialogue in there. It had some of the worst voice acting in any video game. I mean, who can go around nowadays and look at somebody and say, you were almost a Jill sandwich? The voice acting was very cheesy in the game, but that's what people love about it. And it's got a severe cult following behind it. It's still one of the best Resident Evil games out there. It kickstarted a franchise that it's very popular. It's made so much money, and it's something I passionately enjoy, even though there are some entries that aren't that great. Even the movies they're not too terrible. They're enjoyable, but then there are some flaws with them, and I will cover them another time. Today was just a look back on Resident Evil, which has been out for almost 25 years, It came out, when did Resident Evil came out? Alright. It was released March 22nd, 1996. 1996. Almost 25 years for Resident Evil. And I think it came out in Japan before that, I believe. But I believe this is the North American version, I think. Came out in 96. Well, yeah, in general, it came out in 96. So you got to figure Resident Evil's been out for almost 25 years. 24 years for Resident Evil. So this game kickstarted it. I had a lot of great moments with this game. I played this game with friends. I've played it with, my uncle, my cousin. We had we had a very good time playing this game. And as for your game, Splatterhouse came out in North America February 1989. Not 92 or 94. It came out in 1989. There may have been variants that came out after that, but the original Splatterhouse, I'm looking right at it, came out in 1989. That long ago. You know I'm always good to debunk something when it comes to video games. But yeah, that was definitely a survival horror game at one point. It was a beat 'em up too. It was a beat 'em up horror game. We'll cover that at another time. But anyway, guys, that's it for today. For Genesis, platforms. It was arcade. Okay, it was arcade. The arcade version was out in '89. So if I want to look up the console, let's see the ports. Well, I see it was originally on the TurboGrafx 16. That's a console port. I'm gonna have to look that up separately another time. But yeah, I don't remember. It may have been on the Genesis or Super Nintendo, but it was also on TurboGrafx 16. But yeah, the arcade version, the original arcade version of it, came out in '89. So it may have came out on console in '91 or '92, but that's something I'll look up another time. Anyway, that's a look into Resident Evil, the story and all. Oh yeah, I was mentioning earlier as I was reading the story, the plot twist in the end, where Wesker, the character Wesker, turned out to be a double agent. You know, that was a big twist. Like, as you're playing a game and you say, oh yeah, Wesker, you know, there's something up with him. He appears in a couple different spots in the game. And you're like, what's up with this guy? You know, he's shooting bees at one moment in a hallway, and another moment, you know, he's telling you that this hall is too dangerous or whatever. You're down for a talk on the next episode. Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about we'll do some video game variations for another episode. We'll bring Splatterhouse in there, different consoles and all that. We'll talk about that another time. Yeah. But yeah, that big plot twist with Wesker, that was definitely something else. I'll tell you. And it really made, you know, the story evolved over the next few sequels, and the story got a lot better. You added more characters to it, and everything was just gold. And I love this. I love the game for the gameplay. I love it for the story, the characters. Everything was just so good. But other than that, guys, we're gonna close out this episode for today, Resident Evil. I want to thank you guys for coming in and joining me today, as we're looking into the history and a brief glimpse of Resident Evil, the very first game that kickstarted an amazing franchise. Came out in 1996. It was an idea inspired by Sweet Home, which came out in 1989 for Nintendo. Imagine that. And then, of course, there were some elements of first person. It was actually a little tad bit of trivia right here. It was originally going to be a first-person game. Resident Evil was originally going to be first-person, but they didn't utilize that until several games later. I'll get into that with one of the other entries. So anyway, thank you all for joining me today for this episode of Tune In Live. You guys can catch this re-uploaded on our YouTube channel, Arrow Entertainment. Be sure to subscribe over there and catch us on there. If you are watching us on twitch.tv/Arrow with a name, be sure to leave a follow and keep up to date when we go streaming next time, whenever we go live. For updates on when we're going to be streaming and what we're going to be streaming next, check us out on Twitter at Arrow WAN 2020 or on Facebook.com/ArrowEncoded. Thank you all for joining me today on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. As always, I will catch you in the next one.